Line Books present the audiobook of Overpopulation, the hidden agenda for global reset. Episode 4, African Century, Mamadou. Scene 11, Friday, Xiang Shimin Conference Center. It was the morning of the meeting of the Federation of African Nations. In the dining room, a mass of journalists and officials from across the continent were eating breakfast. His European complexion punctured a sea of dark faces, some Arabic, some Asian, but mainly African. With deference to precaution, Banks collected his breakfast and sat near the edge of the room by the fire escape. Old habits die hard. He had just peppered his eggs when the rumble of the room was pierced by the scream of a woman. She had her hands over her ears and was screaming at her table, on which there appeared to be the burnt head of a snake. The room erupted. Men from her table attempted to placate her. Staff rushed to her assistance, to no avail. She was led from the room while staff swept up the burnt offerings on a giant swag made from the table's white linen tablecloth. Banks abandoned breakfast and returned to his room. While dressing, he watched coverage of African leaders arriving at the Xiang Shimin Conference Center nearby. As with all meetings of FIPA, the 5 pillars, that is, the 5 trade blocs that oversaw global trade, they were a chance for the public to see their leaders mix on the international stage, a carefully choreographed act to persuade the public that they were employed meaningfully. Banks made his necktie whilst watching the leader of Cameroon arrive in a grey limousine. He slipped on his jacket and brushed his teeth. Having done so, he saw the leader of Cameroon climb the steps to be greeted by his host, President Mohammed of Nigeria. Banks inspected himself in the mirror and, with pockets replete, headed downstairs to catch the shuttle bus to the Xiang Shimin Conference Center nearby. Scene 12, the African Century. Security was the biggest headache at such meetings. Security outnumbered clients 12-1. While it was all right for PAs, translators, officials, ministers, staff, etc. to remain out of reach, security would never allow their client to be further than a few meters from their protection. Each security regarded their client as the one most likely to be assassinated. So, while the leaders hugged and slapped one another like old friends, their respective security regarded one another with utmost distrust. The first statements were pre-circulated speeches, in English or French, delivered by the leaders of each African nation. They were allotted 12 minutes each, and their speech was translated into Spanish, Russian, Arabic, Hindi, and Chinese for broadcast and subtitling. Then there was a cultural performance of song and dance in costume, followed by a photograph for leaders only. And finally, they would all repatriate to the dining room where the most uncensored discussions took place. The seating plan for these dinners was the most diplomatically sensitive statement of the whole affair. Banks had a seat courtesy of the British High Commission. He sat next to the dignitaries from Togo, Ghana, and Cameroon. After dinner plates had been removed and toasting drinks served, President Usami Mohammed took to the podium. My brothers and sisters, like much of Africa, Nigeria's population is booming. Our future is bright. We have the youngest working population in the world. Our cash reserves to GDP are the highest in the whole of the developing nations. Overseas investment from China, USA, and Europe has never been greater. Mild applause. Banks joined in. We have problems too. Too many in our big cities are suffering from infectious diseases. These new killers that come overnight wipe out hundreds of thousands. Last year alone, more than 27 million died in Nigeria from these new diseases. I will pledge money to resolve this problem. The issue hit home and was rewarded with loud applause. I would like to acknowledge Xiang Shimin Automata for hosting this meeting in their impressive new conference facility. It was funded in partnership with my government. Xiang Shimin have built not only the first robotics production facility in Africa, but the largest of its kind in the world. The applause grew louder. At Banks's table, the president of Togo was so delighted that he slapped palms with a representative from Cameroon. With regards to the proposed new superconglomerate, West Africa Water Incorporated, known as WAWINKS, in deference to the will of Parliament, we shall put this to the people in a common plebiscite next week. The shock of this announcement sucked in all the oxygen from the room. He understood what Lord Martin meant when he said that this century shall be the African century. President Muhammad began to gesticulate. However, my government, the Nigerian government, do not support the wholesale surrender of our water supply to foreign interlocutors. Boos and barracking drowned out the president. The tables were slapped in anger at his announcement. Most smaller nations were in favour of WAWINKS for the initial windfall it would deliver. Over the rumble of the dissent, he continued, May I lead a toast to a special guest. She is intelligent. She is beautiful. She is a native of Abuja, recently awarded Model of the Decade. The lights dimmed. Drums rolled and heads across the room twisted. Please welcome Mamadou! Dazzling light burst from the ceiling. As sights recovered, a tall, silver figure with pale blue hair could be seen flying around the room. She skimmed over the heads of those seated without apparent wire or device, then landed on the cleared podium to jubilant applause. Never seen before with pale blue hair, or in figure-hugging silver foil suit, the sight of Mamadou blowing kisses overshadowed the shock of the president's bombshell. Mr. President, thank you for that welcome. Please raise your glasses for a toast. Everyone in the room raised a glass. The 19th century belonged to the British, the last century to America. This century belongs to Africa. Everyone downed their drink. Then a mighty applause raised across the hall. Presidents, prime ministers, cabinet members, and others stood to applaud. Those on Banks's table rolled with laughter. African pride was unmistakably on the rise. Banks could feel the power of a continent emerge from the darkness. Once everyone had clapped and reseated themselves, Mamadou continued. History shows that we were oppressed by Arabic migrants, colonized by Europeans, exploited by Americans, and today controlled by FIPA. The audience hushed. Banks spotted disgust on the president's face. Mamadou raised her arms in a wide arc above her head. She rolled her head from side to side, then lowered her arms before her, offering her open palms to the audience. The lights dimmed, until her silver costume glistened beneath the light, and just a single spotlight which remained focused on her head and shoulders. There was awe on the faces of those at his table. Mamadou leapt into the air and landed, legs open, knees bent, arms in right angles, like she were about to dance the haka. Her eyes rolled up into their sockets so that only the whites could be seen. Then she clapped her hands and stood upright, arms pressed to her sides in the position of a pole. The audience was uneasy, not understanding what was happening. From behind the podium there appeared the head of a large yellow snake, which coiled its body, thicker than a man's arm, around her arms and torso. Mamadou's head slumped forward while her body remained as still as a statue. The snake continued to make coils around her torso until at one point at which she began to lift her entire body from the ground. As it did so, its head appeared above that of Mamadou's, and its forked tongue flicked out at the audience, tasting the air. A deep voice resonated throughout the hall. "I shall bite any man who colludes with the white man." The effect of the snake talking caused Banks to smile. He appreciated the novelty, even if it did appear to scare the wits out of everyone else. Mamadou's zombie-like arm pointed out at the audience. "If you are here," the voice had a trace of Mamadou's, only an octave lower. The room, the chairs, the table vibrated. Everything on it began to shake. The room was filled with what sounded like the rumble of an erupting volcano. "Let Zuma bite the heart of he who has betrayed our people." President Mohammed began to twitch. His chest pumped unnaturally, and his eyelids stretched wide open. He yanked at his collar. In the grip of the giant yellow snake, Mamadou's body began to rise towards the ceiling. There was a loud clap, and the lights blacked out. In the darkness there appeared a swarm of pink lights that circled above the heads of the audience, which, after a few seconds, exploded in a dazzling magnesium flash, temporarily blinding everyone present. The house lights rose to normal levels. Soft piano jazz tinkled over the audio system, and everyone rubbed their eyes, desperate to see what had happened to Mamadou and her snake. Both had disappeared. A crowd of dark suits were pushing and shoving around the president's table. Banks stood to gain a better view. A body was being carried towards the exit. A house announcement suggested that everyone remain calm and be seated. It was ignored. There was a stampede for the exit as various security teams rushed guests from the dining room in what was tantamount to panic. Banks remained stationary until there was a clear way through the melee of departing dignitaries. Once out of the dining room, he checked his device. Reports were already populating the media. President Mohammed suffers heart attack during fan meeting in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Not strictly accurate, thought Banks. As he looked up from his phone, his eyes met with an old enemy, Mads Aasvik. Scene 13. Mads Aasvik. The last time he had met the young Norwegian reporter, they had clashed in a bar in Svalbard, Norway. He was aware that Mads had been blackballed. Mads stood before him, incredulous. "Ah, Philip Banks. Is there a pie in the world in which you do not have your sticky fingers? Why are you here? I need not ask why you are here. Sale of the world's biggest water company. Sudden illness of a president." Mads smirked. Banks glanced around to see if anyone was watching. Although repelled by being the target of the reporter's barbs, a sudden appreciation for his talents and how they might be exploited possessed him. "I have a job for you." Mads had chased Lord Martin for many years, believing DeLonge Martin to be behind much of global politics. Despite a forensic depth of evidence, he had never found an editor prepared to publish. The conspiracy ran deep. In an attempt to move on with his life, he had moved to New York, where he had met and fell in love with Trina. However, seeing Philip Banks standing in front of him, offering him a job, exposed the depth of his obsession. He wanted, he needed. His purpose in life was to root out and expose the shadows. And Philip Banks would be his vehicle. But there was a game to play. I don't do contracts. I work for the New York Times. Why don't I believe you? Why don't I care? Sneered Mads. I'm in room 235 if you change your mind. Banks began to walk away. Mads racked his conscience, thought of Trina, his promise to her to never pursue that fruitless chase again. Besides, he knew he was being played, but the pull was too great. Hey, all right! Banks stopped and turned. They caught a cab together. The bearded driver, whose Muslim dress played low-volume Arabic music in his cab and maintained a spotless interior. His black leather seating shone and the smelt of beeswax. A small lanyard hung from his rear-view mirror with a picture of the Kabbalah stone in it. From the rear seat, Banks asked to be taken somewhere local and quiet. The driver insisted that no such place existed. Banks offered a clutch of notes, which the driver accepted. No police, no officials, added Banks. The cab wound along local roads until stopping in front of a grubby glass-fronted restaurant called Fatouche. Green and gold Arabic lettering adorned the glass. Outside, beneath a tattered canopy, offering limited solace from the fierce sun, two wrinkled-faced old men sat on aluminium chairs, conversing whilst sucking on their bong. Bong gave the driver more notes. Wait, here. The restaurant was hot and sticky inside. A young man offered them a table, then left to switch on the air conditioning. It kicked into action with the heavy drone of a distant plane. They sat opposite one another, the only patrons in the restaurant. The waiter returned to lay linen and cutlery on their table. Banks ordered tea for two and asked for some privacy. The waiter left again. The chime of a phone prompted Banks to check his message. It was an update from the president. The president is dead. Mission accomplished, said Mads. Banks made a short, jeering shrug. What exactly is your role here? Don't worry, I'm not following you. I'm reporting for the New York Times. Banks pulled up a photo on his phone and showed it to Mads. I want you to trail this woman. Mads observed the way Banks held his phone and looked down on the youthful image of Mamadou. Beautiful woman. They glanced at one another. Do you know her? That's unimportant. Her name is Mamadou Diop. I know who she is. Mads leant back in his seat. I'll need dirt on Lord Martin. How about you trail her and I pay you? How about I don't need your money? New York Times pays good. Banks leant into the table. You, after all you have written, your support for the Gloucester Pact, open government, internet voting and all that democratic bullshit. He stared at Mads until the penny dropped. You couldn't get a job with the New York Times cleaning toilets. Mads suddenly realized why he had not been able to secure journalistic work in New York. Banks confirmed as much with a soft, yes. He'd been blackballed. You bastards. You want to work for the New York Times? I can fix it. You can do that? Yes. I'd rather be in broadcast. All right, a major broadcaster. Mads was impressed. He recalled the hundreds of job applications he had sent out across the United States. His low-paid job at the yard humping stock. How delighted Trina would be if he could secure a proper job. Banks saw that he had struck a chord. I sort out your career. You concentrate on Mamadou. Easy. I'll need her contact. Mads suddenly felt a tinge of pity for Banks. Do yourself a favour. Quit while you're ahead, while you still can. Banks stood. If you will excuse me. Make your own way back. You know how to find me. You have until tomorrow. He left a wad of notes on the counter and headed for the exit. Mads called out, One day they will get you! Banks paused, then left the restaurant and took his cab back to the palace resort.